Okay, now I've got to hop back into my chair to introduce this session. Hi, my name is Jay Frost. If you can tell who I am at a distance, host of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. It's great to welcome you here. I can't really see who is here, but we have managed a way around that today, both from our producer, Jack Frost, who's there in the background monitoring as he always does, but also because one of our guests has opened her laptop so she can also monitor some of what you say. So we'll do our best to engage with you directly today. And we do want to make sure you have a voice in this conversation. So please do utilize both the chat and the Q&A throughout. We would love to see you engage with us that way. If there's something we miss, I'm sure Jack will let us know, and that way we can ensure that we answer your query or make sure your comment is part of the conversation today. Of course, this is, once again, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. It's underwritten by our friends at DonorSearch. And for the last 3 years, they have indulged me as I came back to a place that I deeply love, and that's England, to meet with new friends and old in the sector. And so this is the last of our sessions for this week, where I have a chance to talk with these two leaders in the field of fundraising and philanthropy, and more specifically, prospect development and prospect research. And those are, I guess, starting from, is that stage left or not? Helen Hays, of course, who's right here from the Prince's Trust, and she was kind enough to let us utilize the offices of the Trust. If you're not familiar with their work, I'm sure you'll learn more about it now. It's quite important here in the UK, and it's a good model for us elsewhere. It's also a kind of a window on maybe some of your interest in the Royals. And then, of course, Ben Rymer, who's with UNICEF. And we've had other folks from UNICEF in this series before, and so I know that this will be a different window on that work. Both Ben and Helen are also past chairs of Researchers in Fundraising, or RIF, as it's commonly known here and affectionately known. And that's part of the Institute of Fundraising's group that is focused fully and exclusively on research and prospect development. It's been in operation now, I think, for 30 years, and does incredible work. And it's very much aligned with the kind of work that APRA does over across the pond. And so it's a real pleasure to talk with both of them about their work, about the sector here, and of course, about RIF. So hopefully it's a chance for all of us in APRA world and RIF land to come together and learn from each other and work with one another. I also do want to give a shout out before we begin the conversation to our friends at DonorSearch, and encourage you to take a look for all the rest of our series, as well as a recording of this session over on the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net under the Resources tab, and to be on the lookout, if you're here live with us, for an email that'll come to you with a link to the recording so you can share it with people who couldn't be with you live and in person. If you want to learn more about DonorSearch, you can also do so on the website. We won't be talking about it today unless either of our guests choose to mention them. That's not through a lack of affection. It's simply not the purpose of the series. But if you do care about your donors, I suspect you're going to be looking into them. So once you're at the DonorSearch site, just take a look around and you'll learn more about what they do in terms of helping us to ensure that we know something more about the people who make our work possible. Oh, well, that's a new one. So that could have been either a dramatic ending or a dramatic beginning. We'll see if that keeps happening. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Wow. If you saw how this was balanced right now, you know why that was so funny. So where shall we begin?
Well, that's a dramatic note.
A dramatic note. Yes, this is when MacGyver failed. So Helen, why don't we start with you, since you're kind enough to be able to monitor the chat, set up this meeting in this space, and even fix our tech. So Helen, how long have you been with the Prince's Trust? Could you talk about that, and also what the Prince's Trust is for those who don't know it?
Of course. And big hello to everybody out there, especially to our US friends, and welcome from London. So here we are, based in Southwark. We are in southeast London. So, as Jay said, my name's Helen Hays. I'm head of prospect development at the Prince's Trust. And I've been here for the last 9 years. So in terms of career length, it's probably the longest time span I've ever spent in an organisation. That obviously shows how much I love working here. I've been in prospect research for probably about 15 years now. Originally started in corporate fundraising and sponsorship. So I did a stint at the Victoria and Albert Museum, British Heart Foundation and Anthony Nolan. And then to a certain degree, I sort of realised that I didn't really actually like asking for money, which was a little bit of a problem. So I switched over to research, and I've been here ever since. So a little bit about the prospect development team at the Prince's Trust. We are a team of 5. And I suppose compared to other charities out there, actually, we're quite big. At the Prince's Trust, we have a very large major donor programme and perhaps a smaller individual supporter base. And in that 5, I have 2 prospect development managers, and then 1 focusing more on the philanthropy side of things, and the other on corporate partnerships. And they are supported by 2 wonderful prospect development executives as well. I suppose, should I talk a bit about our remit of work and what we do? So our main remit is prospect identification. So identifying high value prospects, and we sort of classify a major donor as anyone who's able to give 25k plus or more over a year. We also work with fundraisers to help them do their own sort of research. Obviously, research can be such a big rabbit's warren, and anything can typically consist of research. So it's really important that we train fundraisers up as well. We also work with our trustees and our committee members to identify potential networks, to identify a foot in the door. Pipeline management has become a very big thing in the UK. It's all very well identifying the prospects, but if you don't have the processes and systems to move those prospects along, we just find that they don't move. So a lot of emphasis has been given to that. And I think especially in the last couple of years, we're taking more of a sort of performance and a KPI role across fundraising too. And then the other thing we do is manage our ethical fundraising procedures. And given who our president is, so that's King Charles, is our founding president, we've got a very robust policy in place. So maybe a little bit more about the work of the Prince's Trust. We were founded by the King in 1976. So we will be celebrating our 50th anniversary in 2026. And since we were founded, we've helped over 1 million young people. And we do this by boosting their confidence, giving them the skills to get into employment, and also helping budding entrepreneurs set up their own business as well. So we believe that every young person has a chance to succeed regardless of their background. So that's pretty much me.
Thank you. That's a lot too. But no, it's amazing. And I didn't know all the history, honestly. It precedes when I started visiting here myself. That was also a really interesting and challenging time. So it speaks to why the Prince's Trust is so important.
Yeah.
That the 70s were a challenge, and maybe we'll get back into that, about how you've seen the change as a result of that work, but also the donors who found a home in that work. But Ben, what about yourself? A little bit about your history as well as
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And hi everyone, so great to see you all on the screen, and thank you again, Jay, for organizing today's session. I've worked now for UNICEF's private fundraising partnerships team for about 18 months. But I've had, likewise to Helen, about 15 years in prospect research. So I've worked for big national health charities in the UK. I've worked for little NGOs as well, international NGOs. The prospect research function in PFP at UNICEF is relatively new. So it basically started with me coming into the post. I'm a team of 1, but we work across 60 odd national markets across the world to raise private sector funds. So realistically, I've worked with I think over 30 markets now in the last 18 months. My role, even though I live here in London, my role is based in Geneva, Switzerland. So my team is the same with their roles being based there, but we're very international. So we go all the way from Los Angeles, all the way to Seoul, Tokyo. We've got Nairobi, myself here in London. And we focus on really a number of different things. So we work well, to support a product or a group that we've got called the UNICEF International Council, which is donors who are giving to UNICEF's work at the $1 million or above level. So that's a group of about 140 different individuals now who are kind of growing as a group, but support us at the highest level. We've got a strong focus on the ultra high net worth population and the billionaire population. So we're really trying to work with markets to work with those individuals and families to try to raise more from them. We've just launched a global mid-value product, which is being used with several of our markets now to raise from the kind of middle donor space broadly. We've got a new initiative around family philanthropy as well that's just been released and just come out. We work really closely with our foundations colleagues, but the core of my job is really to help the markets across the world to kind of build their capacity in doing philanthropy and ultra high net worth fundraising. And this is all part of UNICEF's long history to support children across the world. So,
and even though UNICEF's brand is a global brand, it doesn't mean that everybody knows what UNICEF does, in the same way that people, I think, all recognize either the prince or the king, but they don't necessarily know about this passion. So UNICEF, in a nutshell, what is it that UNICEF does today?
We work with and for children across the world. We help to not enforce, but we help children to have the rights that they're entitled to. I mean, for instance, we were, I think, the biggest distributor of vaccines through the COVID pandemic. So through COVAX and working with our partners at Gavi and elsewhere. But really, we've got other initiatives that are emerging, like a terrific technology-oriented educational initiative called GIGA, which we're working with. Really, honestly, 18 months in, I'm still learning about the full span of what UNICEF does. We're a really big organization, but really we work with and for children to help them to access their rights and encourage and lobby governments, multi-stakeholder partners, private sector partners to recognize the rights of children across the world.
When we were talking initially about getting together, I didn't make the mental connection at all about both of you essentially working with youth in different ways, in different places. But I know that that's been something that has been reliable in some respects in terms of donor interest. But it doesn't mean it's always consistent, and it's not always at a high level. Both of you are working in this field where you're obviously trying to figure out, among all the people who care, who are the few who really can make a transformational impact. That's at some level what prospect development and prospect research are all about. So how have you found the last few years to be in terms of, before we get into the tactics of it, the market's interest in maintaining support for things that are youth focused? I mean, are the donors still there for you? Are you seeing the donors grow, decline, or remain static?
Do you want to go first? Or jump in?
We are at a period where we are trying to grow our support base again. So when the Prince's Trust was 40 years old, we ran a £40 million campaign. This was the first time we'd ever done anything like this. And we went from sort of more transactional gifts under 100K to the principal giving portfolio. And for us, that was like a stepping stone. We're nearly 10 years past that campaign. We are now launching our 50th campaign, which is a £150 million campaign. Mainly because some of the prospects from the 40th campaign have sort of ended their giving journey, and we're just interested in getting new blood, diversifying our portfolio. So I definitely think the prospects out there. I think in the last couple of years, the landscape's been tough with the cost of living crisis, and everybody knows the first thing always to go is philanthropy. But our nearest and dearest have always continued our journey. We've got a real drive at the moment really to get focusing more on the new business side of things and bringing in new donors, as well as obviously offering fantastic stewardship to the existing donors as well.
I think our experience has been broadly similar. Like we've seen really strong growth in my team in PFP in the last 5 or 6 years. So we've gone from something like 50 to 60 million raised annually up to nearly 300 just in the last 5 years. And so I think that speaks to the change in focus that we've gone through, which is twofold: trying to offer, and indeed offering, more of an experiential experience or a more experiential offer to the donors. So actually helping them to understand what's the true impact of their contribution, but also this strong focus on the ultra high net worth population across the world, which the combination of those things has really borne fruit for us.
Well, that's another interesting similarity but difference here, right? I mean, you're both thinking about youth, and you're both offering an experience to engage with that, coming off the tail of one campaign, entering a new one, et cetera. But there is that additional challenge when you're thinking about how to kind of meet people where they are when you're dealing with ultra high net worth, because the experience country to country is so different. You just mentioned this issue about the cost of living crisis. Now, I don't know that people who are stateside will know much about what was happening here in that front. We encountered some pretty significant inflation, 9% or so, and it's really influenced a lot of discussion, including political discussion. I don't hear a lot of it in terms of its impact on philanthropy. I mean, there was some discussion about that, but it's not a huge part of it. But here, a year ago, there was a concern about, were people going to be able to pay their fuel bills? So would you say it from your perspective, it was even more severe, this idea that we only had certain resources to give, and that might have influenced whether or not people chose to give? And then was that true also globally?
Yeah, I think it depends on sort of what level they were given. So for the ultra high net worth individuals,
they can pay their fuel bill.
Exactly. There was always going to be, I suppose, also maybe like the middle, maybe sort of the 100K level. They might have had other concerns. They may have not got their bonus, or they were their company hadn't performed so well. So naturally that impacts us. But yeah, I would say different levels according to gift size. At the Prince's Trust, we don't have a huge individual donor base. So a lot of our income comes from sort of the high value level donors. And also it was an opportunity, especially with COVID, to use it as a hook. And I think what we saw, non-donors traditionally who weren't giving, there was almost like a call on the government saying, you've got to do something, it's your time to shine. And also we started to see millionaires who'd never given into charity before almost step in their first steps into philanthropy.
Have you been able to retain them?
I think so. I think many of our donors, once they've given, they will continue to give for many years. So yeah.
Yeah. And what about for you?
Not dissimilar. I think there's a kind of a degree of insulation beyond a certain point at the top. So it doesn't quite extend up there.
But you're working on middle donors too. You referenced that before.
We absolutely are. And that gets interesting. It's country to country. And if you're working outside of the global north, if you like, then I think definitely that the dynamic is different there. So the pinch or the squeeze is more outside of the global north. But I think because we've been focusing on quite a high level, we haven't seen as much kind of retrenchment or consolidation of household budgets as you would a little bit further down. But I have noticed what Helen mentioned. There are these organizations coming up now saying, we want to contribute. So Resource Generation in the US, there's an organization here called Patriotic Millionaires, who are saying literally, we want to help, we want to come forward. So yeah, that's kind of a new trend.
Do we have a Patriotic Millionaires group in the US? If anybody knows, please give me their phone number. I would love to know what that is. Call them up. I know that there are people everywhere who are responding to the call. And I guess one of the questions embedded in that inelegantly was, once they do respond, whether that is from the government or from a sense of, just kind of urgency, they see what's happening around them, do they keep doing it? So when we began the conversation, even before we went live today, we talked about COVID, because it's still there. I mean, I don't mean illness, that's still there too, but in our past, in terms of its influence on things. If you were to walk around this office, you'd see how few people are working here, but they're all working. They're just working from their homes. So there's been an influence on many things. One of those things clearly is going to be on donors, what they chose to give to in the middle of an emergency versus what they choose to go to and give to maybe when they don't feel that emergency is as present. So, I mean, is there a bit of that in terms of what you're doing and how you're focusing, but also how donors are responding? Difference today?
I'll jump in if that's all right. I mean, what we're trying to do is think more strategically about emergencies. UNICEF is known very much for emergencies. So just even since I began in this role, we've had Sudan, we've had Gaza, we've had, COVAX happened before then. Sadly, across the world, there's always at least one really serious, urgent emergency through the year, in a given year. So I'm really trying to think, okay, how can I, as a prospect development professional, leverage data to help with that, so that when the inevitable sad day comes that we need to activate and approach donors, we can do that within a day rather than within a week, because time is of the essence at that point.
Wow, that's really interesting. And you have a lot of notes here, so I don't want to stop you from sharing them because I have a feeling acceleration may be a theme. In prospect research in the past, long ago past, the conversation was largely about things like proactive versus reactive. Well, there's really no time to even be reactive at this point if you need to decide things like this in order to respond to a public that wants immediate answers and wants to respond to things. So, and I'm sure you have thoughts on this too, and I'd love to hear about whether or not that acceleration has been true for you. But I'm also interested to know, is anybody saying anything we should be mindful of?
No, I'm just having a quick look. There's quite a lot.
So if you have any questions or comments, I hope you're noting them there, and we'll do our best to address them as we're having this conversation. I want you to be a part of it.
No questions at the moment. Mostly lots of people saying hello from all over the world. It's lovely to see.
Feel free to keep saying hello. We do like that. And for that matter, if you've seen a change maybe in the speed of your work or where you're putting your time and emphasis, that would be really great to know. We can respond to that too. So Helen, how about for you? Have you seen kind of a change in terms of either the speed at which you do work or maybe focusing to an even greater degree in a smaller population of people? And then that kind of begs the question about how do you find them? But just to start there.
Yeah, I think we used COVID as a hook to attract new donors. So many young people during COVID were suffered sort of employment loss, depression, stress, and anxiety. So when we came out to the end, it was time to rebuild. So that sort of accelerated our giving program. And then from that, we have the 150 campaign. So this is such an amazing hook to reach out to more our traditional philanthropists, but also new blood. We're trying to attach like the tech, the fintech, digital. Traditionally, I think if you look at our donor base at the Prince's Trust, we have that sort of set of philanthropists that you can find almost at many other charities. But how do we really diversify our portfolio to attract donors from different ethical backgrounds, diversify into like green technology, and to ensure also thinking about the next generation. So typically our donor may be sort of a 60 or 70-year-old, may have sold their business, and I'm looking at maybe your principal giving donor now, and not wanting to stereotype. Maybe what we're not seeing so much is sort of the new blood, this sort of 40 and 50-year-olds. How can we encourage them to give big? Because there is a lot of money there, but then maybe they're not at that giving journey of that part of life. I don't know where you find, Ben, in terms of the age of donors, but they're sort of at the likelihood where they're thinking about school fees and mortgages. So most of our sort of principal giving, there's definitely an audience profile in terms of who we tend to attract.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I should have mentioned at the start, we've got kind of a really path-breaking next-gen initiative that's been running for 20 years. My colleague Casey founded that, indeed, quite a number of years ago now, and that's really well established and really feeds through and is a great way for us to engage with the next generation of wealth, whether that's from a family perspective or whether they've founded a business, as you said, and are looking now to give back. And there's really interesting initiatives in the US where you have sort of founders pledges and pre-IPO gift commitments and this kind of thing. So there's a bit of disruption and innovation happening through that. But yes, for sure, UNICEF is very alive to the next generation, helping them along their journey to become philanthropists. I think that kind of stewardship of the next generation of philanthropists is really critical.
I know that was always happening to some degree. We were trying to pay attention on what was out there in the distance in the horizon, but it seems like not only has it maybe accelerated, to go back to what I was hearing in some of what you said, but also that maybe the tools available to us, perhaps there are some tools that we can use in order to find and define those opportunities differently or maybe better. What kinds of things are you using, tools and techniques, in order to address the need for this optimal audience of people without ignoring the people where there's an opportunity, but maybe they haven't risen to the challenge yet?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, you go.
All right. I'm trying to take a second look at some traditional practice. So understanding the kind of behavioral signals and interpreting them from the CRM. Like, we all work from databases, and
what are you using as a CRM?
We're on Salesforce.
Okay.
So the markets are on different platforms. I know it varies across the markets.
But sure.
Yeah. We use Salesforce. but I'm trying to help and give a bit of a instruction even around how to interpret the CRM signals. So looking at giving patterns, but also looking at behaviors and seeing, who are the first time donors, even where that gift might not be the very biggest. Often we know philanthropists will give a tester gift to see what the reaction is that comes back.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Yes, I know. So that means that we have to get other people or other partners in the team to really respond to that in a way that keeps those wheels turning.
Keeps the wheels turning. And also as part of that, I try to reinforce and be a broken record on the capacity to give versus the actual dollar, pound amount or euro amount that we're seeing.
Why is that so important?
It's absolutely critical, because we, like working across jobs, we've all seen, I'm sure, smaller gifts given from people whose capacity is up here. And guess what? A lot of times we look down here and we say, oh, it's 100, 500 pounds, 200 pounds or dollars. But actually the capacity is sky high. And that's an old lesson, I think, but it bears repeating for sure.
Right. Jay, do you get that in the US, test gifts? Is that quite common?
I believe so. And that's another thing where if you get test gifts or if you're aware of it, we would love to know that in the chat. We'll do our best to monitor that. But I do believe that that's true, that I've given them, and I know I'm not in your top pool of donors, but I will give to an organization sometimes for months on end to see how they interact with me. And it's not always about ego. Sometimes it's about the kind of professional courtesy that we all expect. And I know we've talked about this in one episode in the past where there was an organization whose work was really, I thought, was profound. I read a book, I saw a movie, I wasn't aware. I started giving at a level of, I think it was $100 a month, which for me was important. And then, but after a year, I was still getting dear friend responses. And so I thought, well, if they don't know who I am, then they don't know who anybody is. And so that changed my view about that. And that's not quite the same as a 500-pound gift from a person who can give you 100,000 pounds, but I do think that there's testing that goes on. Do you experience that, Helen, this kind of testing in your file?
We do. I think it is all about dipping your toe in the water and seeing sort of the level of service you get, the stewardship. We do occasionally sort of go from that 0 to hero, but that tends to
I love that expression.
Tends to be quite rare. I think for those gifts to come in, there's got to be a really strong affinity to the cause. Or a really strong sort of trusty level connection, but they do happen. They do happen. We've got a question from someone, from Nina. Do you find that young high value givers want more input control into the projects they give to? Yeah, I would agree.
The involvement is much more important for them.
Well, are you offering them an opportunity for involvement? Maybe that's the next question.
Through the Next Gen initiative that I mentioned, yeah, absolutely, you can become involved. And actually, I think outside UNICEF, I think it's a trend. I was lucky enough to be at APRA a couple of weeks ago in Seattle, and the keynote speaker there spoke very well, Lisa Greer, of I think her daughter and kind of that age cohort wanting to volunteer before actually giving and actually getting involved with the organization. So
Lisa Greer has been in the series. She's coming back soon, and you can hear a podcast with her by going to our podcast. So check that out on Apple. But yes, she's a very powerful proponent of listening to donors, which you were just both talking about, looking at and trying to divine from the file where there might be a person who can go from 0 to hero. I'm going to have to remember that. But it does presuppose that we have both the process and the tools in place in order to be able to define who those people are. So what are you using to do that here? Because you've had some barriers to certain kinds of data in the past. So, I mean, if you had to buy 3 things right now, right here, in order to help you with that challenge, what would they be?
Sales Navigator on LinkedIn.
Okay. Sure.
I
don't mean to make you endorse products. You don't have to answer the question, but I love that. That's a very clear, easy answer.
Prince's Trust, I should add, we're soon to be about to become the King's Trust. We are part of the King's Trust group, which also consists of our sister charities. So we have operations in the USA, Africa, India, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So we use Sales Navigator for prospecting, for example, looking at UK people who may have gone to university over here or have some sort of connection and now maybe living in New York. So it's a really easy way. And we tend to find actually the acceptance rates of getting meetings is actually really good via LinkedIn, maybe more so than email.
Wow, that's a great tip. You can take that back to your colleagues. Absolutely. Yes.
Other tools we use, we have something called here for D&B Hoovers, which you probably have something like that. You have it in the US. So that's really good for sort of our metro place-based strategies. So for identifying maybe companies that live in a 50-mile radius of one of our centres. And also we do a lot of sort of employability programs. So looking at companies with large staff bases as well. Maybe another one that springs to mind, New Trust Update by Factory. So this is a monthly publication of all new trusts that are registered on the Charity Commission. So it's a bit of a time saver, and they'll pull out potentially any sort of major donors that are worth interest in.
Wonderful tip. Thank you.
Yeah, great resources. And I think Sales Navigator is brilliant. It's a really good resource. We have a major partnership with Altrata WealthX, which we're lucky enough to access. iWave is now part of the Kindsight group and had a good presence in Seattle. But I have to make the distinction between the West and the kind of global South, if you like, because once you're outside of the sort of UK, US and you know the wealthy world, if you like, I have to resort to different or use different resources. So there's a great one called Open Corporates, which is free or very, very, very cheap, and which gives you insight into corporate groups and sort of visualizes things. And then like local media, like looking at the local sort of press and published newspapers and that kind of thing, literally like country by country, region by region. If you're working internationally, you have to do that, I think.
Those are wonderful. Do you, when it comes down to looking at your database itself and then trying to figure something out and going beyond maybe recency, frequency, single high skip, that kind of thing, all of which is important. Are there other things that you can use that are maybe internal to the institution, either software or data science staff, whether it's some kind of AI that you buy off the shelf or something that you're writing in-house? How much of a part of that part of our field is making its way into your offices?
Do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
Is that right? So I think from the UK, what I've seen is a slow move towards that kind of almost DIY insight. So I actually, back in 2019, I actually started off the Researchers in Fundraising Handbook, which is now really well established. But one of the things that we struggled with was to get people with programming expertise involved. So one of my sort of goals for that project was to have researchers interact with the data more. Usually it's sort of intermediated. You have to go to the insight team, they give you it back. But I'd love to see more of us using that kind of thing, like R and Python, but to actually get in there to do the kind of tests that you mentioned and go beyond RFM or RFE, that kind of thing.
Right. And I guess what you're describing there is actually having the internal staff capacity, but then finding a way to make sure they work together. Is that?
Yeah, or even from our teams doing it directly yourself, like getting in there and learning about the tables, seeing how it all joins together.
It is possible. You don't have to have a degree in data science.
Sure, and it's spread. Yeah, for sure,
Right,
absolutely.
Right. What kinds of things are you seeing here? Are people doing that within?
We are. I think we are very lucky that we have a chap called Rodrigo who is fantastic at doing all this coding and sequences. But I think certainly since I started prospect research, prospect researchers have given a greater degree of skill set in managing the database, doing their own reports and queries. And then anything really technical would then actually hand over to the supported data team. But we have training ourselves on the database. I even employed a database manager as a prospect researcher because I think we need to have access to that data as well all the time. And then there's also a capacity issue in terms of supported data team as well. So being trained up in certain things. I mean, I couldn't write a Tableau report, for example, but at least I've got the basics in terms of using RE, which is, I think, crucial for us. And we do have a couple of questions. Going back to test gifts. So with regards to the test gifts, how would the organisation know that it's a test? I suppose gift capacity. So someone comes in at say 5,000 and they've got a gift capacity rating of 150 million. That might be a sign.
Yeah, and then it's like discovery. Right?
Yeah,
this is like qualification discovery, and it's There's kind of two schools, I find, of philanthropy. There's the one where we do internal stuff very much. And then there's the other one where it's like we're more open and we just have the conversation and involve the donor in their journey with us and their giving. So being as open as you can be, I suppose.
Also, if they're given, is the engagement level there? Will they respond to future events and invitations? Could be sometimes. We've sent them an invitation to a big gala event. They give us 5K. It's almost a go away sort of gift, so to speak. But you never know unless you try and uplift them. You never know. As everybody knows, it's much easier to get an existing donor to uplift than to get a new donor.
And a lot less expensive, and time consuming. Do you survey your donors? Because I mean, if you can't find a rating and there's not some kind of, I don't know, tool or something you have, or they don't indicate through an event or some of their activity, do you still, just send out something or have survey questions within either print or digital documents so you can get a sense about that they really are interested in doing more?
I'm not sure from our individual giving teams point of view. I can't speak for them. I think that does happen, but from the philanthropy teams, I'm not sure actually how much that does happen in terms of surveys going out to donors. I don't know if that's a big part.
I don't think we'd, it's sort of the British thing, isn't it? We wouldn't necessarily go to him and say, oh, how much are you? I think most of the qualification, I suppose most of the qualification we do on paper. So we look at things like percentage, affinity and wealth capacity. And it's really the job of the fundraiser to go out and test that qualification to see what sort of response it is. So we can actually only go far. I think we're not like Mystic Megs where we've got sort of a magic ball and I mean, at the end of the day, we don't know what's in someone's bank account. So really it's just a...
Mystic Megs is another, I think I'm going to have to write down all your phrases today. Rabbit Warren, Mystic Megs, 0 to hero, you win. I think that with all these things we're discussing, one of the challenges is the law, and so far in our conversation we haven't gotten into that. Maybe we won't. Another has to do with the technology and the staff we have. You've just addressed that, and another is cultural. And I don't like to lean too much in the cultural because sometimes, at least for Americans, I think we use culture as an excuse to not do things. Oh, people over here don't give. That's because we don't want to go and involve them and ask. But you just mentioned one that I should be listening carefully to, which is you're not necessarily doing all these surveys because it's not something you'd be inclined to do necessarily. Is that correct?
I think there's a point we have to be sensitive to the donors' information. So what information we would collect, we would never want them to feel intrusive. And we have to put it, ourselves in their shoes. Like, would they be happy for us?
How would they feel about that?
And I suppose many major donors would sort of expect that because they would want to be cultivated at a level that's right to them. But prior to, in the UK, we when we start processing information on a prospect, we have 30 days to get our privacy notice out to them to make them aware.
And so just to clarify, so if someone responds or gives or does something, then they're given the opportunity to opt in. So versus the US of, we can pretty much write to them until they opt out. Is that approximately?
Yeah, not necessarily we have to necessarily opt in. It's more we have to show them their privacy policy, which basically lists how we're going to be processing and storing their information.
Or so they can send the
opportunity to read it. Yeah, so that could be as simple as putting it on your email signature, and that potentially could count as showing someone your privacy policy.
I see. Thank you.
So, and then obviously they have the opportunity to opt out at any point. And obviously there's communication preferences in terms of how. But prior to us, someone receiving their privacy policy, we do use something called legitimate interests, where we have a legal basis to process information on them, but not in too much greater detail. So this would be quite skeletal framework. And at this point, we wouldn't do much wealth analysis on there before we'd given their privacy policy. Once we've given the privacy policy out, and as long as it's explained in our privacy policy that we do some sort of wealth analysis, then we're in a much better position to sort of look at gift capacities and net worth.
And you said there's another question. I realized that scuttled that.
Right. Hello, 2 questions from Cleveland. How frequently might you reassess prospects that you have already researched? And is there a common mistake or trap new prospects like me should avoid?
How commonly? Shall I just give a
Yeah.
quick
Take that
answer to
first.
that? I just think you need to be doing this. I mean, I'm just going to say every year or two, if possible. I think once you're getting beyond 3, 4, 5 years, there's a good chance that the information becomes outdated. I appreciate some of the organizations on the call are going to have big prospect pools, so that's going to seem like a big ask. But I think certainly for assigned people or relationships, I mean, yeah, I would say.
Well, a lot has changed in the last 2 years, let alone the last 5 years. I mean, financially, and yes, absolutely.
Goodness, yeah. So these things always change, and I've forgotten the other part of the question.
Any sort of common mistakes or trap new prospect researchers?
For new prospect researchers, my whole session at APRA this year was about looking across lists and the variation between data sources, and I think there was something around the challenges of verifying data, because you can have different estimates of personal holdings and give capacity. One is up here, one is down there, and you have to kind of you have to find yourself in the middle somewhere. So that power of interpreting intelligently, I think, is important for researchers. I don't know if you find that with different data sources, and particularly people newer into the industry, if you have to kind of guide them in doing that. But,
yeah, no, definitely, I agree. I was just going to focus on sort of common trap mistake. So I think you can over research. So when it comes to prospecting lists, you could do from 20 to 100, drip feed them through to fundraisers, see if they're actually taken forward. If they are, then you add more. Same research profiles, give yourself time limits, because otherwise you can keep going. Another one is building those relationships with fundraisers is absolutely key. I think sometimes as prospect researchers, and I don't want to stereotype here, we can be maybe seen as sort of, I don't know, more introverts in terms of our personality sometimes.
Yeah, it's true.
So trying to put ourselves into the fundraiser's shoe, making sure that the information you present is really simple and concise. I know sometimes we love our technical we go into all the wealth analysis and go into the company reports and look at dividends. At the end of the day, how much do they really need to know that? I mean, a gift banding is potentially all that they need. They don't have that much time to digest rolls and rolls of information. So think about yourself, what the fundraiser, what information are they able to digest and keep?
I would go even a step further than that. I'm encouraging in the last year or two fundraisers to researchers to do fundraising. So actually take a little step over the fence and go and do it yourself. It's really instructive. It's very helpful, even if it's just, like job shadowing or working with other teams, because this division of labor has arisen within the industry, which when you look back, and researchers in fundraising, I think they were originally fundraisers like Chris Carney and others who needed to do some research, and they did that. But now the scale has grown, so we've got teams, research over here, fundraisers over here. It's really helpful to have a kind of first-hand knowledge from the other side.
There is a certain amount of risk, isn't there, in becoming so highly specialized? I don't just mean prospect researchers, but all different fields within philanthropy and society as a whole. So highly specialized that we lose the ability to speak the language of the other people who are our partners and understand what their needs are.
Exactly. And Lisa's speech was very good on that. So just sense checking the jargon and the terminology and the language that we use. Ultimately, our donors are people, right? We talk about prospective donors, but these are people, and the words that we use really matter in setting us towards keeping that in mind.
Do we have anything else that's there before we? Thank you for these questions. Feel free, as long as Helen is willing, we are willing to entertain them.
Ben, you mentioned you're thinking about how to leverage data to approach donors sooner if there's an emergency. Please, can you give an example?
Goodness, what are we doing with that regard?
It's becoming a quiz show, which is always fun.
I mean, this is an emerging bit of work, so I should say this isn't currently happening. But one practical example is to look at diaspora lists, for instance. So looking at holding on file lists of probably higher value individuals or families who are living outside of the country of their origin or birth. That's an important segment or audience for us at UNICEF, thinking about diaspora as a kind of audience, if you like. So I think that's a practical example whereby you can have a list or lists ready. And when something happens in some part of the world related to that family's place of birth or heritage, then you can press go on that. And there's some tools out there. So an NGO called International Crisis Group does a kind of risk tracker. So you can see, you know, red, amber, green, what's at risk of flaring up, and you can kind of use that to guide your proactive list creation.
Right.
So
that's brilliant.
an example.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the people who are sitting in today may be in places which are, you know, more not homogeneous isn't the right word, but they may have had a more static population that's largely representative of the way it looked 20, 30 years ago. But at other cities, whether it's New York or London or LA, or, you know, I can think of 100 places, it's not like that. You walk through London and it's polyglot.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the most diverse cities in the world, for sure.
Yes. And so, but now I'm trying to think from their perspective. If you're from South Asia somewhere and something just happened somewhere and you have an affinity for that, you'd want to know. So it's not just that we're looking for money, it's that we're also looking for a mechanism to communicate with people who care about the same things we do. And if we don't keep the list, how can we let them know? And therefore, how can we raise money?
Absolutely. And it's also being conscious about what our offer is to them. So this isn't, I mean, we work in fundraising, but we can also share information, and UNICEF has a presence in lots of places, so we can send information back and forth and keep people updated. So yeah, there's lots that we can offer.
Any thoughts on this front? It seems harder, but let me take it from another vantage point. So you said 1977?
76.
76.
Yeah.
So I'm remembering London, my first visit. Well, wait a minute, where are you both from originally?
I'm from the north of England.
You're from the north.
Yeah,
Whereabouts?
A place called Rochdale, which is in Greater Manchester.
Okay.
Yeah,
Northwest.
Northwest.
All right. And
I'm from Essex.
and you're from Essex. Okay. All right. So London is a place where people are from everywhere, right? So, but London in that time, because I remember it starting in 1981, was in some ways a different London from today, right? And all the different people who have moved here. So when you're thinking even about the Prince's Trust and about these populations, if you looked at the population in 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, and on, it must look a little bit different, both who you're serving, but also the people who give. So that must put an additional challenge as you're thinking about all the people that you need to keep in contact with, all the different programs that might be appealing to them, especially all the people who have, I don't know if you call them graduates or alumni, but all the people you've served who now are at a different point in their life and may be people who want to invest in the success of this program. So are you seeing different ways of thinking about your population over time?
Yeah, definitely. And I think going back to what Ben was saying, you mentioned you had sort of a family philanthropy initiative, which is really interesting because traditionally I think we've always looked at the person who makes wealth in the family, but actually it's a family as a whole and it's more as a collective that actually are making the decision basis. And I still think in the UK there's still a tendency almost to go after sort of the male hedge funders or maybe private equity, but equally we should be going after the women because they often actually do make the decisions and they're more probably likely to respond. And I think sort of we do neglect that sometimes.
We do, and that's a bias. Honestly, it's a bias. I feel in the industry and the systems that we use, you know, very often they nudge us towards looking at the individual person, and within that, even the male individual person, the patriarch in the family. So
I suppose if you look at our rich lists, they're
oh my goodness,
now, aren't they? So and therefore, naturally, you know, you tend to go to whoever is the head of the house, but often next generation, wives, even the extended family.
Oh, absolutely. And we need that's something to lean back against for sure. Like, and that's for us, right? We build the pipelines and we're the ones who are actually like they're putting names down for suggestions. So that's a challenge.
It's like 167,000 charities in the UK. And they're probably all going like the rich list, everybody, and they must get thousands and thousands and thousands of invitations. But often if you go like to the second tier down, so you've got the founder of the hedge funder, but even the chief financial officer or the managing partner, they're making still millions, aren't they? And I bet they're the ones that actually don't get.
That's something that we, and that was again my session at APRA was all about that, like going beyond just the sort of name, the top. Like there's a lot of hidden gems underneath where you just need to scratch the surface.
Well, plus, I mean, even those who are not ready to be cut into those things that we inlay in our rings. I mean, they're still those gems that are emerging.
Yeah.
In those cases, we have to still start developing the relationship. So we can't just wait until they're ready to be pulled out of the diamond mine. I mean, this is always a problem with fundraising.
So we're also seeing a lot more giving under the radar. So like the US, our DAFs market is starting to increase.
Oh yeah.
But CAF and in the rich list this year came out with a statistic that only 23% of those who give really big like to disclose themselves. So a lot of them are actually, they're hard to find. And I think it was Philip Beresford who he said that only 25% of those who could be are in the rich list. So
interesting. There's
especially private equity. So
here we're talking about the Times Rich List, which you can get online, and in fact Jack can probably put that in the chat. And then Philip Beresford has been the editor, and I think
he's stepped back now, but a few years ago
was the editor.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because actually it's another Brit who founded another list in China called the Hurun Wealth List. He's called Rupert Hujaberth. But he has said that for every billionaire that they find, they miss 2. So not too far away from what Philip estimated, but again, just scratching the surface, right? Just having that kind of investigative mindset. Now,
you've mentioned a couple times your session, and it was probably recorded.
It was recorded. Yeah.
So what was the name of the session, in case people want to check that out?
So people are very welcome to look. It was called The Hidden Wealth of Nations. And it was a really international focus. So looking across the US, looking at the Philanthropy 50 that the Chronicle publishes. So I looked at that, looking at China, comparing then the Gulf and the UK, and looking at the French, it's called the Challenge annual fortune list that they publish there, and just looking across and trying to, from a practitioner's perspective, understand how can we use this and how can we intelligently interpret the kind of very different numbers that we see across them.
So I don't know if that's something that Jack will be able to find quickly from the APRA conference, a link to it, but if he can, that would be great. Otherwise, you can look at aprahome.org if you're not familiar with it already. That's the Association of Researchers that is global, but the membership is largely US based. But the conference this year, there were many good sessions, and this is one that you can check out. There are also sessions that were held through RIF, or Researchers in Fundraising, because you just held your 30th anniversary conference, didn't you, in January?
That was last year or the year before? Yeah, I lost track of.
I thought it was this January.
This one. Yeah. Right. Oh, Chris spoke. Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great heritage that we've got here, and it is growing year on year.
And it's really good, because I think during COVID, we went for a couple of lines where it was done virtually, but nothing beats being in face to face. And I think researchers are also in a unique position, is that maybe they're more willing to share information, because we're fundraisers, have got sort of the data protection around the donors. But there's no real, until your handbook came out, actually, there's no real Bible for prospect research. And that's how you learn. You learn through speaking to, you learn for understanding. We've got a great, there's a prospect research chat, isn't there? Yeah, UK chat.
How would people find that?
I think it's pr.groups.io, and then it's just prospect research at the start. So it should, if you just Google search prospect research UK group, you should find it.
Okay, hopefully we can put that in there too. Thank you for that.
It's very busy, isn't it? From everything from potential, how do you find prospects in this part of the world, or can you identify a better process for this?
So very much like Prospect Delve, but UK focused.
And so much in the fundraising sort of sphere, is it?
Well, I don't see that. I'm just not as connected on that side, but definitely it's an active list. And I was always going back to when I came into the sector. I remember Prospect EMM that used to be run out of MIT, I think a few years ago. I learned so much from that, and it's broadly similar. So these listservs are just essential.
Yeah, Jack found it. He's put it on the chat.
Thank you, Jack. I don't know if we have other questions there, and you may not be able to see the Q&A. I'm not sure. But Jack, if you see anything in the Q&A, feel free to share that with us. There's a lot we've been throwing at you, and hopefully this is all information that you can use readily, or at least to have a different perspective on the different opportunities that are available to you. maybe it's time for the uncomfortable question, which is sometimes I've had people contact me from outside the United States because they're looking for money from the US. And then sometimes if I want to come over and talk to people here, there's a little bit of this, oh, it's the American, they're coming for money kind of reaction. Are we outgrowing that finally about this kind of almost, walled off provincialism about where the donors reside? Because as you pointed out before, you could have a transnationalist living in Knightsbridge, sure, right? They're not really British or Indian or American. They're a citizen of the world. For sure.
I think many of the real top philanthropists and the billionaires don't necessarily associate themselves with just one national. They're sort of global citizens. And philanthropy is fantastic in terms of breaking those barriers. So, for example, they might have come to university over here in London, but be American national, but have a business over in Australia, and it's connecting all the points, why, and then the offering. And I think also the philanthropists are looking for more than just focusing on their home nation. I think the stewardship, trips abroad, amazing, and they want to show that they're obviously a global citizen for them. So it's really important that
to be totally 100% agree, and to be like the language and the frameworks of impact investing are now very well known and very well acknowledged. So gone, I think, some of the days where that donation mindset is kind of the only game in town. Like, people want to invest in the organization.
But talk just a little bit more about that and why that's important.
It's important because it enables you to do more. It enables you to involve people more deeply. It opens up, ideas like theories of change and the spectrum of capital, which may be more drawn from the investment community, but have a great deal to offer us in the nonprofit world, for sure. And that kind of equity mindset, where people are not necessarily just giving, but investing, deepens the involvement that they have with the organization. So where you might see in private equity or venture capital, the person taking a seat on the board, for instance, and actually steering the company, that's that kind of thinking is coming to nonprofits, and it's a different involvement, it's a deeper involvement, and I think the younger generation are very much at the forefront of that as well, as we said earlier.
And in terms of the work that we're all discussing in these kinds of roles, is the process for identifying, researching, cultivating roughly the same anyway? Impact investors versus,
I think there's some differences, but
I think the principles wherever you go will always sort of be the same. There's different levels in terms of what information we're able to process or share depending on the nationality. But a prospect always starts in terms of research, qualification, handing over prospect management. So it's pretty much this.
Just kind of offering different opportunities.
Different research tools, different cultures in terms of how we communicate them. But yeah, having sort of been in the prospect research for sort of now 20 years, do you think, things have changed on, of course, we've got like AI now and, for the better, but the standard principles still apply, I think.
There's maybe a slight difference in perspective from how we see these things. So I read a story recently where a gentleman called David Dunlop, who was at, I think, Cornell or Princeton, Cornell for a long time, and actually kind of began the idea of mood management, right?
Yep, along with Jerry Panis, absolutely.
Jerry Panis, absolutely. So he, the story goes that he was at, I think, a case conference, it's the biggest gift of a lifetime, and he said to the audience, okay, who's heard of mood management? A lot of hands in the room go up, and he said, I was afraid of that, because it's kind of, I think his point of view was that it's kind of drifted from what it was originally, which was a kind of way to engage people with the relationship first. But as the years have gone by, the idea of having moves or steps or stages or actions has become the end goal in some frameworks. And so you actually get into a slightly different place. Rather than putting the relationship first, you put the kind of the meetings or the visits.
And so I just have to add to that, because I think it's so important, because something that Jerry used to tell me was that it's not about moving donors around like chess pieces.
Right.
This is about moving the idea from his perspective, because Dave Dunlap definitely initiated all this, but the way Jerry would characterize it was, this is about moving the team around so they could better invest in the relationships, not moving the donors around like they are, chattel or cattle, excuse me. Very big difference between the two. So and it looks like you were seeing something out of the corner of your eye. Do you see anything there?
Oh no, I was just it was someone I used to work with.
Oh, I
saying
just
that-
want to make sure that we didn't miss any of
Like
your
in the
comments or
office.
questions. And it does feel like we're getting, and just in realizing this, to about an hour. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think we
No,
are.
it's well over an hour.
So, we are. Oh, my. So thank you for listening as we continue discussing all this. I'm obviously too interested to pay attention to the clock, but I do have kind of a last question for you, and then maybe we can sum up.
Sure.
Since no one's asked it, I will, which is, what is it like working with the royal family?
Well, I'm going to say fantastic. I've got, I think what King Charles has done is amazing. I've got a soft spot. If you look at what he's achieved in terms of setting up the Prince's Trust, and then expanding that to us globally. I haven't met him. Maybe one day I will. I'm not sure. But yeah, we have a great culture here.
And the royal family's been really very generous.
We're about to, I think I mentioned, we're about to go to the King's Trust and change your name and change your brand. So check back on the website come November, and it should have a refreshed appeal. So we're very lucky to have him, and very supportive.
And I don't know if there is an equivalent for UNICEF, aside from maybe the
Well, we're very lucky. We have a presence in so many places, so we're lucky to be supported by several of the royal families across the world. I think
I guess that makes sense.
Patrons, don't they?
That's right.
Patrons, and I mean the British royal family do a lot for a lot of charities. So when I was at Age UK, I mean they support very many. So yeah, we're very lucky to have a family who are focused on that. And for UNICEF across the world, we're very lucky to have that support.
Yeah. So for our friends in the US, and maybe those who are here from other places, both live and in the recording later, any kind of thoughts about how we can ensure that we are all communicating in a way that we can share ideas with one another? Just a few minutes ago, you referenced resources that are here. There are always resources that are specific to markets. But you also mentioned a big resource guide that you worked on, that both of you, I'm sure, contributed to a listserv that's specific to the UK. We obviously have one in the US. How can we ensure that there are more conversations between and amongst all of us so that we can share ideas cross-border?
That's a really good question. I think just using the channels that exist. So yeah, all the listservs, we've never been more connected, I feel like, with all of the different platforms that we've got. I just, come forward. Again, with the handbook, we were incredibly lucky that when we put the call out, we had like almost 100 people from across the world come forward. So I would encourage everyone watching today just to take part, step forward, read the trade press that we've got here. It's third sector and civil society and whatever is out there, and come to the conferences. Like we've got RIF, we've got APRA, we've got case conferences. Just take full part. And I think through nature of that, people will be able to actually understand what's going on, and then hopefully come forward to take part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was also going to say APRA RIF bursaries to be able to go off, because it is, I mean, to be fair, it's quite expensive for traveling, and seeing how APRA and RIF can maybe work together to see what could be on offer for that.
And if there's a vendor out there who'd like to sponsor some of that work, that's a very nice thing to do. And they are not speaking on behalf of RIF right now, but I'm sure that RIF would be very happy to entertain a discussion with you. Our vendors can always be as generous as I know our sponsor has been. Our thanks to DonorSearch again for letting us have conversations like this one. There will be nothing on the program for next week because I'll be at sea returning to the US. But when I get back, we'll have more sessions coming up that following week on Tuesday and Thursday, as well as our podcast. So I hope you'll check all that out. But for now, I just want to thank you for tagging along as I've had these great conversations, and especially to Helen and to Ben for letting me sit in today and talk with you and learn from you. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Great to be with you.
And we'll look forward to seeing you all next time back on the other side of the pond. Until then, take care. Now I've got to close out.